Good morning, everyone. Quick show announcement to make. I'll be doing a face-to-camera interview on Critical Thinker's YouTube channel. He's starting up interviews with PPC candidates. It'll be an open-ended discussion, and so I hope you join us. It'll be 8:30 p.m. tomorrow night, Tuesday night, so I'll probably mention it again tomorrow, and it should be fun. I like to do interviews, so it should be a good time. I think there'll be another candidate on with me as well, which should be fun. So yeah, check it out. Here's Mr. Bernier tweeting, CPC has some tough challenges crafting their platform. Conservatives and liberal policies on the economy have become so indistinguishable that Andrew Scheer says he's had to read a pile of old books to find out how they used to differ. And this is a painful minute, but we're going to listen to it. But it's a painful minute. Okay, here we go.
You know, I'm often asked, what is the biggest difference between conservatives and liberals when it comes to the economy? That's an important question to me, and as I prepared to give this speech, I really wanted to answer it the best I could. So, as you can imagine, I consulted a lot of the books you may be familiar with, going back to Adam Smith and all the tombs, all the intellectual thought that goes into trying to answer that question. Litigating in great detail all the intellectual nuances of both conservative and liberal economic theory. But I thought I'd save you some time and not go through all of that, because I kept coming back to essentially the same point. Liberals put their faith in government, conservatives put their faith in people. It really is that simple.
Yeah, yep, and he lost me right around here. It was just kind of boring, and there's no punch. I don't know. It was a miss. It's a miss for me. That's a miss for me. So, interesting to point out. Anyway, here is a People's Party candidate or a People's Party member? No, a People's Party candidate doing a column for the Toronto Sun, and he says, why repealing the Multiculturalism Act makes sense. And this is one that I wasn't aware of until he announced it at the policy speech that I was at. And I'm really excited about this because it's hard to do a lot of the reforms that he's talking about without repealing this act. And I was thinking about that, like there's some legal blockades there because that is the law of the land. And if he's going to repeal that, well, it makes sense. Here's the article. It says, the Canadian Multiculturalism Act is, in many senses, an ill-considered document focused so squarely on today that it ignores tomorrow. So said Trinidad-born Neil Bisundeth 25 years ago in his best-selling book, Selling Illusions, a stinging critique of Canada's misguided experiment with official multiculturalism. The statement's even more relevant today, which is why my leader, MP Maxime Bernier, this past week called for the Act's repeal during a rally in Mississauga, where he introduced the People's Party of Canada's platform on immigration and integration. Although the other parties won't admit it, Canada is becoming an increasingly difficult place for newcomers to integrate and assimilate for the sake of keeping Canada a viable, cohesive nation. This has to change. The Canadian people agree. A 2016 CBC Angus Reid poll found that almost 70% of Canadians want minorities to fit in and assimilate more. A Forum Research poll that same year showed 2/3 of Canadians saying immigrants should be screened for anti-Canadian values. And in 2015, an EKOS poll found 41% of Canadians simply thought fewer visible minorities should be coming in order to hasten stronger integration. Meanwhile, more recent polls show much frustration over refugees and immigration in general. These results capture the frustration citizens rightly feel when their elected leaders create laws based on hope, not reality. When the Multiculturalism Act was enshrined in law in 1988, building on Pierre Trudeau's earlier policies, Canada became the first nation in the world committed to, quote, enhance multiculturalism and to ensure that immigrants could, quote, keep their identities. Even though immigrants by their very coming here show at least some willingness to integrate into a new society, by adopting the Act, Ottawa chose to elevate ethnic division above national unity. Again, to quote Bisundeth, the Act is striking in its lack of any mention of unity or oneness of vision. Its provisions seem aimed instead at encouraging division and ensuring that the various ethnic groups whose interests it espouses discover no compelling reason to blur the distinctions between them. By pursuing multicultural globalism instead of bicultural nationalism, along with mass immigration, which by 1988 had tripled compared to just 5 years earlier, Ottawa embarked on remaking Canada into a nation of nations, relegating its national identity to nothing more than diversity, tolerance, and pluralistic values, an experiment with no clear goal or a discussion of its consequences. Canadians were indeed being steered into uncharted territory. But the above polls show that the Canadian public understands nations within nations never work out so well, especially when cultural distances and vast ethnocentrism is aggressively encouraged. They know, the unfortunately rich history of ethnic-based strife and secession in the world, from the Ottoman, Habsburg, and Russian empires, as well as the Soviet Union, to modern-day examples like Singapore, Pakistan, the Balkans, and South Sudan. As the opening line from Basunda suggests, the act completely failed to consider limits. As he says elsewhere, what was left out of the public discussion were important questions like, how far do we go as a country in encouraging and promoting cultural differences? And is there a point at which diversity begins to threaten social cohesion? Why don't elected leaders ever directly consult Canadians on such questions? After all, everything has limits, and Canadians have a right to national self-determination and a right to say who and how many may join the nation. Diversity without dialogue would seem to nullify those rights. That is exactly why the People's Party of Canada is proposing change. We aim to respond to Canadian people's concerns about immigration and multiculturalism and put decisions about Canada's future back in their hands. Robert Stewart is the People's Party of Canada candidate in the Toronto riding of Spadina-Fort York. So, full disclosure, he's a candidate. And I wasn't sure at the beginning of the article. And the last article for this morning's first video, and I'm going to keep it all together. Yep, we're right on time. Good. I found this one eyebrow-raising because I think this is probably indicative of our federal government, too. I think it is. CTV News is reporting, and this is on July 28th, so yesterday. Quebec Green Fund money used for pet projects, new minister charges. When Liljana Latjovic, sorry if I've got that wrong, was named to the council governing Quebec's multi-billion-dollar green fund in 2017, she thought she was going to use her science background to help choose projects aimed at fighting climate change. Instead, Latjovic said she and the 8 other council members were asked to sign off on proposals whose financing had been already approved by various government departments. Moreover, she said in the case of many projects they were approving, councillors had no idea how the projects were actually going to reduce emissions of the greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, that trap heat in the atmosphere, causing global temperatures to rise. It's interesting that they had to add that. I just find that interesting. I wasn't going to mention that, but I just find it interesting that they had to, that's what this does. So that's why it's important. I mean, maybe. Okay, back to the article. My opinion is that the Environment Ministry didn't care about the reductions, Latjovic said in a recent interview. Quebec's Green Fund was created in 2006 as a way of collecting billions in revenues, in large part from the province's version of a carbon tax, and redistributing the money towards initiatives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But the so-called Green Fund has been widely criticized as a boondoggle. Quebec's new Environment Minister, Benoit Charest, is promising reform, but he has a colossal task ahead of him. The province's past mistakes highlight the difficulties of managing a multi-billion-dollar fund to which various government departments have access. Instead of promoting projects with strict greenhouse gas emission targets, the fund became a buffet for the pet projects of various ministers, Charest said. Unfortunately, yes, Charest said in an interview when asked whether the fund was being misused. Certain departments helped themselves to the fund, so to speak, without a guarantee of results on investments, and the previous government let this phenomenon go on like that, which made things even more deplorable. I like that use of the word. Back to the article. Charest said despite the billions of dollars collected since 2006, the reduction in greenhouse gases was very small across projects that were financed. Quebec collects hundreds of millions of dollars every year from carbon credit cap and trade system. Companies that emit high amounts of greenhouse gases are legally forced to purchase the right to release those gases into the atmosphere. Quebec sells emission credits 4 times a year at auction. Since its inception, almost $5.6 billion has been poured into the fund. And from the beginning, the program has been mismanaged, according to several reports from the province's Auditor General. Various government departments use money in the fund to finance projects without calls for proposals or without specific criteria to evaluate greenhouse gas emissions reductions, the Auditor General concluded. In its 2019 report, the Auditor General's office said, nearly 5 years after the publication of our initial audit report on the Green Fund, we can only be disappointed with this situation. News reports over the years have indicated millions have been spent to major oil companies and airlines for projects with dubious greenhouse gas reduction targets. Maple syrup producers receive hundreds of thousands of dollars to replace evaporation equipment. Millions more dollars were given to taxi companies to help them adapt their vehicles for disabled people. A spokesperson for the Liberals, the party that created the fund and managed it until they lost power last year, did not make anyone available to respond to the criticism. Following harshly worded reports on the fund's governance by the Auditor General, then Premier Philip Couillard in 2016 created the council to oversee the distribution of money, but Latjovic said that most of the time her job consisted of rubber stamping projects chosen by other departments. The council chose about 10 to 15% of the projects that received financing, she said, while the rest were pre-approved elsewhere in the government. We wanted to know what we were signing for, Lakovic said, and some of the members wanted to resign because they didn't know what was going on. Charest backed up Lakovic's comments. It's unfortunately true, he said. It's really what's happening. We had a situation where the fund wasn't being used to its potential. There was confusion regarding responsibilities. It's what we want to correct. In June, Charest announced reforms that would ensure the funds fulfill its mandate. First, the Green Fund is getting a new name. It will now be called the Electrification and Climate Change Fund. Instead of the governing council on which Lakovic sits, Charest says the new fund will have a committee of experts who will oversee how money is distributed. Their reports will be public, he promised. The fund will now be fully under the Environment Department, Charest said, and its ministers will be accountable. In the future, if there is a management problem, we won't need multiple searches to find out who's responsible, he said. Finally, Charest said the Auditor General's office will be tasked with producing an annual report on the fund's governance. We consider this public money, so it's important that it's properly managed, he said. But Lakovic, who has a master's degree in geological and earth sciences, said the fund has been a lost opportunity. It's sad the council didn't work as it should have, Lakovic said, because it was a good thing, and I thought they were really going to care and do something about climate change. Right. So they had this fund. They distributed the blame around enough so that you didn't really know who was responsible for what, which is what happens when you've got a federal government doing environmental policy and the provincial governments doing their own environmental policies. You should enable your provinces to do what they want, and then the people know who to hold accountable. That's important. And this fund was massively mismanaged, and I mean, hopefully they fix it in Quebec, because that's a lot of money. I wanted to correct an error. I said that Mr. Mansur, Salim Mansur, who is now a candidate for the People's Party of Canada, formerly was a nominee for a candidate as the Conservative Party. And I'm just going to read his statement because there was some confusion, and this is the reason why I was confused. So I apologize for that, and I want to correct my statement. Okay, here it is. Statement from Mr. Salim Mansur. Over 9 months ago, I made the decision to seek the Conservative Party of Canada's nomination in London North Centre and submitted my paperwork with a $1,000 deposit as required to the party's headquarters. In November, the party's regional organizer told me that I could launch my campaign and that all of my papers were in order. On June 10th, I received notice from the Conservative Party of Canada's executive director that my candidacy had been disallowed for reasons not specified. This email told me I had a right to appeal my disallowance to the party's national council. I took a few days to speak with my family, friends, supporters, and campaign team. I submitted my appeal by email on June 15th. On June 17th, my appeal was rejected because 24 hours had elapsed from receipt of the disallowance notice. So, according to some people who talk to me and comment, they said that I was incorrect, and perhaps I was incorrect. It seems that Mr. Mansur believed that he was the candidate and was able to launch his campaign, and that's more what I was referring to. Sometimes I get things wrong, so I hope this clears up what I was talking about. Thanks for watching. Check out the People's Party of Canada.ca and have a wonderful, wonderful day.